Guys, I have a new sponsor called Cultural Church Conditioners. They go by C3. Basically, there's a lot of churches out there. They're good at coming up with content, but they're not good at coming up with content that's applicable to other demographics that you're trying to reach. So basically, a church will come up with content. They'll send it to Cultural Church Conditioners, C3, and then C3 sends it back, but it's relevant, edgy, and applicable to the culture that church is trying to reach. So, for example, check out what they did for the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. This was submitted, and the demographic target was rednecks in the South.
Did I pledge my allegiance?
Why ain't we looking at the deeper stuff that caused all this shit in the first place?
For the purpose of progress.
Because we have a culture of church folk who would prefer a narcissist.
Cut. It's Narcissist.
I don't know what the hell that means. How am I supposed to say?
To a priest or a prophet.
Shit, I need my reading glasses. Mark just came and said, if you plant a church, he's going to tear it down dick by dick. What the hell does that mean, dick by dick?
Playing God in the process.
How dare you? Louder. Who in the hell do you think you are?
Was I chasing convenience?
You act like a scientist? There's real chronic trauma that comes from working in systems like this.
In a wave of disaster.
There's a few of you that if I wasn't going to end up on CNN, I'd go Old Testament on the Old Testament.
Where the captain's a captain.
A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking piece of shit, fucking asshole.
I'm a puppet to pastor.
So like shouted at the top of my lungs. Who do you think you are? I'm Mike Cosper. It's a story, this podcast story of a great old big-ass church that changed lives, gave people hope. But then you find out the leader of the whole damn thing is corrupt or sick or something. So as Christians, you look back on a shitstorm like this and you think, I thought it was awesome, and now you got shit in your head you got to work out that was the community worth it? If we had it to do all over again, in other words, would we have started this in the first place?
Paint the beauty we split. Paint the beauty we split.
So, the rednecks in the South are gonna love that. So you guys know me. I have to say this. None of the jokes were intended to critique Christianity Today's Rise and Fall. Obviously a great podcast. And I also know that there's still people hurting over this whole deal. I hope that was able to give you a little laugh. And I will say this, some things occurred to me as I was putting this little thing together. I actually get a bit offended by the stereotyping of Southerners. Now, I don't mean like poking fun stereotyping, but when people actually think that in the South it's just a melting pot of redneck, uneducated bigots that love to fly Confederate flags, talk about the Civil War, listens to country music, worships Donald Trump. I mean, none of these things apply to me. Except I like history, so I'm always down to talk about a war. And if the country music is 60s and 70s, I'll for sure be interested. So anyway, all that to say, I'm the product of a lineage of rednecks. My great uncles, check this out. Their names were Gaither and Crawford. This is a true story. Crawford had his foot sitting on a tree stump. This is my grandma's uncles. Foot on the tree stump. Basically, they're both drunk. Crawford says to Gaither, you better get your foot off that stump because his foot was touching his foot. And Gaither said, I ain't moving my foot. Crawford said, you better move your foot or I'll cut that damn thing off. Gaither said, I ain't moving it. So what did Crawford do? He took an axe and he took the axe to his brother Gaither's foot and chopped off the top half. So that's the kind of family I'm from. And I can make fun of rednecks all I want to because that's me. So, hey, we should start a contest, honestly. If you come up with an idea, I mean, we threw this together, like, and the actual content in minutes. So you guys come up with something good, send it. I'd love to showcase some more fun ideas with this. Oh, and just like that, it is Christmas. My gosh. Gracious. So check this out. I decided to make a list of my favorite Christmas songs this year. I make lists about tons of stuff. The guy that produces this podcast, he's not as bad as me, but he's pretty bad too. Like, I've got a list of my favorite all-time basketball players. And I'm not kidding. And I'll beat you to the punch, Joey. That's called a problem. I know, but I just like lists and the things that I enjoy. I like knowing which ones are my favorites. So anyway, for those of you that are not interested, click that little forward 30 seconds button a few times, but here are my favorite Christmas songs. So number 10 is I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. And thanks to Dave Bazan, this has become one of my favorite Christmas songs because his version of this on the album called Maybe This Is Christmas Time, it's actually by Pedro the Lion, Bazan's band, is absolutely mesmerizing. Number 9 is, I think it's called The Christmas Song. You know, the chestnuts roasting on an open fire. That's number 9. Number 8 is O Little Town of Bethlehem. I mean, who doesn't like that song? Number 7, What Child Is This? Who? Something and something. Number 6, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Number 5 is, it is, you know, if kind of like after a college football season, you look at the rankings and you see what happened from one week to the next. Well, from 1 year to the next, have yourself a Merry Little Christmas moved up majorly in the polls. We got that at number 5, and you really can't beat Judy Garland's. But my Lord, there's a lot of versions of this song. I just love it. I love it. Okay, O Come Emmanuel is my number 4 favorite Christmas song. You got to check out Belle and Sebastian's version of that. And then number 3, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. Number 2, Oh Come All You Faithful. And oh, the one and only number 1 Christmas song is Oh Holy Night. And we've got a Pastor with No Answers discussion page, and we got some voting going on about these Christmas songs, and Oh Holy Night is hanging tight at number 1. Now, my favorite Christmas recording is actually by a band called Ages and Ages, and I don't really know anything about this band except they were on an album called Holidays Rule back in 2012-ish, and their version of We Need a Little Christmas makes my little indie rocker heart so happy. So I really hope it's a good one for you. Let's enjoy one another in this life. Like, as Team Humanity, we have no way of knowing what's in store for us all, but we're going to go through it together, whether we like it or not. I know that much. So speaking of togetherness, I love hearing from listeners and patrons and critics. Today we have 2 positive feedbacks. One comes from Jennifer Carter. She is a faithful patron, and she uses the actual words. I won't say them, but in reference to our conversation on a possible double standard in words we can't use about having to do with a female body part, but we can as far as the male body part. She says, thank you for holding your ground, Joey. For the record, not all women are so sensitive. The P word is to woman as the D word is to man. Why does everyone have to get offended about everything? It's annoying and exhausting. Humanity did stupid shit in the past, and we're doing stupid shit now. Man, I agree with that for sure. Can we just do our best? All right, so we got some feedback from the Bethel music episode. It says, I listened to the Bethel episode this morning. Good stuff, man. I tell people this often, but I believe your podcast is my favorite because of your ability to approach so many things with such humility. I've had to take a break from so many podcasts because everyone is convinced they know everything. I appreciate yours, man. It's always good to listen. Thanks, man. I really do appreciate that. So if you want to be a patron of this podcast, your chance to lock in at a much lower rate. So basically, we've got a $5 rate for the collection plate. It's pretty much the standard way of being a patron, a Pastor with No Answers. You get pretty much everything, except for some of the additions for the other tiers like t-shirts and some airtime on the podcast and those sorts of things. But the collection plate tier of giving is going to go up to $8 in 2022. If you get it right now for $5, it will stay $5 throughout all eternity. Yes, you will be paying me patron money up in heaven. Now, here's patrons, what they get. They have their own podcast feed. Whatever episodes I record, it goes straight to their feed with no hesitation. So on that feed right now, there's an episode that's coming out next year, Chip versus Universalism. Yes, we're going to crank it back up because Chip told, I'm not going to get into it right now, but Sharon Putt, formerly Sharon Baker, talks to Chip about universalism, gets him thinking, and man, Sharon has become one of my favorites for sure. There's a purity culture for guys panel. There's an evolution creationist new earth guy. We've got an Eastern Orthodox part 2 with some badass priest that comes on here. I love it. And we've got an episode all about sex. So the Pastor with No Answers stickers are made. Patrons, send me your addresses if you want one. And for everybody else, there's a Venmo in the show notes. Send me any amount. We'll send you a sticker. And hey, if you already did that, I'm pretty sure we got you covered. But man, I'm so sorry to ask, but reach out to me again and just make sure we have you down for a sticker so we can send you one when they come in. So it's fun being on the other side of the mic. I love talking to Mason and Cullen from, or is it Cullen? Like Cullen or Cullen? Cullen? My Southern voice has a hard time with that one, I reckon. But the Black Sheep podcast, fellas, thank y'all for having me on there. We talk a lot about faith, a lot about music. I actually have some chapter markers for your convenience. If you just want to listen to the music part, you can skip on over there or what have you. But love you very much. I hope everybody has a good Christmas. We got one more bonus episode to wrap up this year. Will come out in a couple of weeks, I think, and then we'll crank things back up full throttle in January. Peace out.
It feels like we know you.
Yeah.
Hundreds upon thousands of hours of yourself speaking into a microphone.
Right.
And at the same time, there's a ton of stuff that you're doing that I think is worth talking about. So it's like, we know all this stuff about you already. And there's all this background. We know a lot about you. You don't know much about us. And it's like this, I don't know. It's a weird thing that I can't really explain.
Yeah.
You're an easy interview, but a hard interview at the same time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think so. Yeah. I was just telling you guys, I guess for your listeners' sake, how podcasting for so many years, like it really does kind of feel like that's an honor to hear you guys say that y'all have listened to Bad Christian. I mean, especially in the early years when we had no idea what we were doing. Yeah. Pastor with No Answers for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, all right, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, what you podcast about, for those who might be, totally uninformed and that they should go inform themselves immediately. What is it that you do and what is it that you podcast about?
Yeah. So I think of my podcast as like a journey of my life and the changing of my faith and how influenced I am by the conversation. So, I mean, if you go back, oh my Lord, to episode 1 of Pastor with No Answers, it doesn't even sound like the same guy, like where I was at theologically. So that's kind of the main thrust, is just a safe place for anyone to communicate their theology, their views of the world, and what they were taught without getting heckled and judged. But I think a theme that has been that the podcast has been transforming into is kind of a prioritization of love in these polarized times, especially when there seems to be so much anger and bitterness in the church. And I get it, man. I had Jamie Lee Fitch and Propaganda on the podcast to talk about that very thing. And It's interesting. It's like I get the fact that it's easy for me to say, hey, let's focus on love when I'm white and straight and a male. And propaganda even said, hell, I'm good looking too. So what?
Yeah,
That?
South,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I'll take that for propaganda.
Privileged as fuck, good looker.
But like I understand that I'm kind of in an easy place to do that. But I also have learned recently, like in the last few months, this is kind of how I think God has made me to use my voice. Like there needs to be some people out there saying, hey, stay pissed off. Things aren't right. Do something about it. Don't be complacent. And I wouldn't say I'm complacent. I'd say I'm very, very aggressive towards reminding people about love. We recently had an episode on, we had Derek Webb. Derek Webb, is he deconstructing his deconstruction? I've told the story of my mental health crisis 2 years ago, and including the breakup with Bad Christian. I mean, so storytelling, telling other people's stories of tragedy, and then just theological discussions on the world. Like, Mason, you hooked me up with Melissa Floor Bixler because I wanted to release a couple of episodes from two different perspectives of abortion. So I'd say that's I should probably think of a shorter way of telling you guys what I'm up to on the podcast.
That's perfect, man.
Yeah, the elevator's on the 50th floor at this point.
Yeah. But it's fun, man. I mean, Pastor with No Answers literally started off as a little side thing that I did for the hell of it. It was like, so Bad Christian was like an outlet for me being in evangelical ministry. And then I feel like Pastor with No Answers was an outlet from Bad Christian, because some of the conversations that we would have on Bad Christian, I wanted to camp out on even longer. And so that was kind of what Bad Christian was for. I didn't really care about numbers or even I kind of cared about quality, but if you listen to the early episodes, I didn't care enough. But now it's kind of my main thing. I really, gosh, I've turned into a podcasting perfectionist, and that may be an embarrassing thing for me to say. People may listen and like, you're not doing a good job, but I feel like it's like once an episode hits, I'm very meticulous with how I want it to come across. Like I've gotten into last year where I will send my brother way more edits than I used to. So hopefully it's turning into even a better product, but all the same, it's fun. So
that was actually something I wanted to comment on. Was I really felt I really feel, because I was one of the early listeners on Pastor with No Answers.
Yeah,
and I took a little break there for a little while. I was kind of getting burnt out on
the hell, man,
on podcasts about
the hell
Christianity.
You stopped listening to me.
Yeah, for a brief moment, but I came back, and it was like a totally different podcast. Like you were saying, the production value just went through the roof, and the way it shifts up pacing.
Yeah.
With having like little sectionals of other people coming in and talking and things like that. It really makes it engaging and totally cool.
I really appreciate those sentiments. Kind of my goal, if I had to put into words, is when I release an episode, it's okay for people to say, not interested in the content, but my goal is for no one to ever be able to say that's a dumb podcast. Like that's bad quality. That's totally fine if they don't like the content, but my aim is for them to be like, that's still a pretty good podcast. It's just not my cup of tea,
Yeah. I would say too, like something that brought me back in was some of those episodes that are more about just storytelling.
Yeah.
It felt good to kind of come back and not be totally focused on the Christianity aspect of everything. Because sometimes that gets tiring.
Yeah. It's weird because I don't know where to, I don't feel the need to categorize Pastor with No Answers, but I don't know where to put it. Like I think about one of my favorite podcasts, Bible for Normal People. And it's like,
wow, I love it.
They really have fine-tuned what they're about. And it's amazing. And it's on the Bible. Other than like a faith journey and a safe place for evan and ex-van and all of that, like I wouldn't really know. That's why it took me so long to describe my podcast, because I think I talk to people that I'm super interested in. I talk about things that I'm in the middle of questioning and I haven't figured it out yet. And then, like you said, Colin, telling stories and that sort of thing, man. Telling the depressive episode of 2019 was heavy, man. It was heavy. And I plan on even telling more, but that was,
dude, I bawled
some harder stuff than I thought. It was way harder for Priscilla. In fact, she kind of dropped out before the last one was released. I mean, it's not something that she has
fully processed, to be honest with you. It's some heavy stuff. Like, honestly, 2 years ago today, like, I've been looking at my journal, and so tomorrow in 2021 marks the 2-year anniversary of what I would say was literally the worst day of my life. Wow. Like, I was like, I got to kill myself. I can't do this anymore. I mean, I journaled, like, it was like all the tortuous, toxic religion even started, and I had no control. I mean, Joey Svendsen in 2019, who has rethought everything and come to maybe a more peaceful place, all that stuff came to the surface because my mind was so broken. And I mean, I started worrying about hell, and just it was a mess. It was an absolute mess.
I found those episodes to be extremely interesting, solely for the fact that I don't know if I've heard anyone chronicle kind of that feeling, that depressive state, quite like you have. I mean, first of all, it's not something that we hear very often in the first place, because people they have this stigma around it and this shame from it, and this negativity that comes with it. And people don't want to share that story. Yeah. People want to share the story of coming out on the other side. And,
right.
And that's what is like the biggest thing. But really, that is a state of mind that is all encapsulating. Mm-hmm. And there are people out there that are experiencing. I've lived with depression, not myself per se, but others in my life, and it's been brutal. And to hear it from someone from their own perspective outside myself is so much more beneficial. Man, I was bawling when I was listening to that episode. I was in my car driving home from work. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Which one was that? Do you remember?
The 2019 one. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I had a very, very kind, you guys get a kick out of this just because we kind of think in the same circles to some degree, but a listener of my podcast, his name's Godless. He has like a Metal Sucks podcast. I think he changed the
he's great.
But he messaged me. It was the kindest, sweetest to me, to Priscilla. It was very heartfelt, but it was funny. He's like, the only thing that really pisses me off is all this credit that you give to God when you did all the work and your friends were there for you. It's like, screw this God stuff, man. You guys did it.
So you talked at the beginning about how your faith has totally changed from episode 1 to episode now. And I find it interesting, given the fact that, I don't know, maybe you didn't anticipate your faith changing the ways that it has. Like, I don't know, maybe you did. I mean, you literally called it Pastors with No Answers. Like, I mean, I would imagine that there was like maybe some level of a goal or hope or dream that would maybe happen. But when you first started it, what was sort of the maybe idea around it? And then what has happened since that when you look back at it, you're like, well, that was not the idea, or that has changed in terms of the podcast itself, like the premise and the idea around it?
Well, I'll say this, and I'm being very, very literal. 2010 Joey would tell 2021 Joey that you were going to burn in hell forever.
2021 Mason's telling Joey that too. So,
but you know, not in a mean way, but just, dude, you have lost your way. You have followed after men's teachings. So I didn't expect that sort of change. So Jay Baker, people can Google him if they don't know who he is. He came on Bad Christian pretty early on. And he kind of joked with us, but he was kind of picking at us. He was just like, you guys call yourselves progressive. Like, all y'all are is conservative Southern Christians that cuss. And it was kind of offensive to us. We're just like, what a prick. And it's funny because I look back on that though, and that was the truth. Now, I don't take that as a negative slight. It just was the reality. We were very conservative. The only thing that was different about us is that we swore, we were vulgar, and we were super open. But as far as where we landed with LGBTQ, we would say we're lovingly unaffirming. I mean, as far as hell, I hate it, but people are going to burn there forever. I mean, so that's when Bad Christian started. I've got these old school Bad Christian books that I found. And I mean, we would get canceled for this shit. Like if this got circulated, it'd be stop listening to Pastor with No Answers, stop listening to Emery, stop listening to all of it. They're canceled. So I never, ever, ever thought that I would be where I'm at today. Like the first episode of Pastor with No Answers was, can you be a Christian and a Universalist? I was not a Universalist at the time. Now I would be.
to me, when I was listening early on in Pass with No Answers, it seemed like the episode that you did on hell.
There's a lot of them, son.
There is, but the earliest one. I remember
one.
I'm trying to remember back. I should have gone back and
throw the dart at the dartboard of episodes of
about hell. But it was weird. It was kind of crazy because at the end you had a lot of interesting questions that seemed extremely interpersonally connected, and I'm curious if this kind of shift towards a more progressive attitude in Christianity has maybe been. Was it something that was like a catalyst and then everything kind of fell in line from there? Or was it just kind of this gradual shift? Like, oh, the culture's shifting, I'm shifting, my friends are shifting, I'm going to continue to go with it.
Yeah. It's weird, man. So if I go back to, hopefully this answers your question. If I go back to my evangelical days, I would say what I did to accept salvation is still in place. Like if I still believe that way, I'm good. I said the sinner's prayer and all of that. So with that in place, whether or not I'm on the right track right now, I cannot help but to feel like God rescued me, because on the other side of my deconstruction was literal hell. Well, not literally this time. It was literal last time, but not literal this time. But like when I thought about hell, it destroyed me. When I started entertaining Calvinism plus hell, I was like, how can this be? I mean, I remember as an adult, a married man, just absolutely plagued. And so I understand people's sentiments of, well, yeah, I mean, you're accepting all this progressive bullshit because it's easier to stomach, but sure, that's part of it. And I'm very appreciative to have a lot more freedom in my faith, but it didn't come without tons and tons and tons of like, I'm convinced of it. Like with how I read the Bible and how I see God, I am convinced the way that I believe. But, it's interesting too. It's like we read about all this, freedom and, Jesus came to give us life more abundantly and all of that stuff. I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm actually experiencing that. Mm-hmm. So that's got to say something about the burden that I was under.
Yeah. I remember when I first started, quote unquote, deconstructing, it was around like purity culture and everything. And I remember the first time I had like been intimate with somebody, I remember thinking to myself, that was the first time I ever really felt like this true freedom, this like life abundant. And I could not shake the fact that that's how I experienced that, and was also trying to be a Christian. Yep. And I just didn't know how to reconcile it because it didn't feel like it was going to be reconciled. And so that's when I like had to go find like, are there other ways of thinking about Christianity that allows me to truly experience what I experienced in that moment and recognize that as like living abundantly and living in freedom in Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my first step, honestly, my slippery slope that I got on was probably Rethinking Hell, and literally the host of Rethinking Hell. Yeah. I mean, this super sharp, smart as hell dude that just is so convincing on an nihilistic view of hell. To the point of is like, it's almost feels irrefutable. Like this dude is just taking every single scripture. And so I will say that was kind of a relief. It's like, oh, so there's a chance that people don't burn forever and ever. I like the sound of this. And then that obviously led down to that slippery slope. But yeah, that was the beginning for me, was rethinking hell. I was rethinking hell and still probably gay, unaffirming.
I thought you were about to stop that sentence there for a second. I was still gay, and then like, whoa, Joey,
didn't know I was gay.
This is a big deal right here. We need to stop.
I'm using y'all's podcast to tell the whole world that I used to be gay, and I read some de-gaying Christian books, and I'm not anymore.
You're the only ex-gay that's still gay affirming.
Oh man.
Well, okay. So speaking of all of this, people might be interested, like, where is your faith now? Like, what is it that you actually believe? If your faith has changed so much over all of these years of doing the podcast, like, what is it that you believe about Jesus? What is it that you believe about God? What is it you believe about all these things?
Yeah. I think the foundation would be God is infinite. I mean, I would say this all the time, but I wouldn't take it into what this really means. God is infinitely bigger than what our minds can even grasp. So it's almost like I want to have this reverence towards God that when I think about God, I'm not even scratching the surface. So I think that's the foundation, is stopping my attempts to try to put formulas on God and figure everything out. But and I know for some people they'd be like, well, you're still pretty conservative, but I do believe Jesus is God. And I do think that Jesus is the central figure in the universe. I believe there's a God. I believe Jesus is God. But I am open to Richard Rohr's take on Jesus.
Universal
I think he would say that Jesus was fully human and was the perfect blend, because of God's doing, was the perfect blend of divinity and humanness. But I call it childlike faith or whatever. I mean, I believe in a virgin birth and Jesus is Lord. And I don't believe that Jesus died to save us from himself. That just sounds so weird. But I do think, once again, a childlike faith sort of thing. And I love the lyrics and how John Mark McMillan says stuff, and I'll butcher it to pieces, but he said something to the effect of the death and resurrection could have been, this is how I took it, but is built into nature, just like the tides and the waves. Like, I do think whatever Jesus did needed to be done. I think I would probably fall a little more into Jesus Victor, like just taking shit back over and, hey, it'll be complete one of these days, but I did the beginning stuff. I did what needed to be done for death to be extinguished. But man, that's about where it ends. that's about it. But dude, it feels so good just to be able to camp out on that. I'm okay with saying, I don't even know if that stuff's true. I believe it with all my heart, but I don't know if there's a whole lot more that I believe with all my heart pertaining to theology, because I just don't know if we were built to be able to do that. I mean, people crash on experience and, you can't be led by experience and stuff. It's like every single Christian has an experience that they go back to. It's like we all do it, and I don't think that we really take into consideration how big of a deal it is. The biggest proof for God in my life is when I was going through deconstruction. I was scared like a little child, like, oh my gosh, what is happening? What am I letting go of? Am I Christian? And every now and then I would just sense the perfect clothing of love and grace, like a dad and a mother just perfectly saying, you're all right, man. You're all right. Almost like pat me on the head. Hey, everything's okay. Don't be scared. Like, you're right where I want you to be. Just you're fine. And then that feeling would kind of go away. It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this earlier today. The feeling would go away, but that's an anchor for me, man. I always go back to that. It's like, I wasn't praying for that. I wasn't seeking God. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing anything. It just, boom, just fell from nowhere. So if it wasn't for experience, my faith, I think, would be pretty shallow.
I mean, there wouldn't be a Christian today if it weren't for the experience that Paul had on the road to Damascus. It wasn't that Paul read the right Bible verse or anything, or was convinced by the right apologetics person. It was an experience he had.
Yeah, all these people that we're reading about in the New Testament didn't have the New Testament. So it's like, dude, the church was birthed because they saw freaking fire on their heads. I mean, however you want to take that, at least that's what scripture says. There's freaking flames on people's heads and they're, speaking different languages. That was a freaking experience, man.
It makes me wonder, as with your tenure as a pastor, did you have a lot of anxiety about these changing beliefs and these questioning beliefs, especially how your congregation would feel about it?
Yeah, I would definitely battle with that, and I would waver back and forth, because me being in that place also had its huge bright spots, like talking to people in like a pastoral counseling setting who are really having troubles with their faith. When a lot of pastors would say, well, you just got to buckle down and believe, let go of those doubts and all that stuff. And, I'm not making fun of that, because I know it's coming from sincerity, but, there's a lot of people that I was able to talk to, and I'm glad I was the one talking to them and not your stereotypical evangelical posture. But yeah, I mean, my thing is I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. So man, I don't want to cause any trouble. You know what I'm saying? Like people see me as like this rebel in this rebel podcast, and I don't want to cause trouble. And so my fear was always rocking the boat big time. And bottom line is, I mean, I find out now that, gosh, like I was rocking the boat the whole time and our leadership was just absorbing it all. And they knew me, I knew them. There was a mutual trust level there. But I would say that, you know, I would, especially the further that I got, and I've told this on my podcast, but as of the last 3 weeks, I still work for the same church. But after 13 years of pastoring this church, I'm no longer pastoring a church. I'm actually working for Seacoast, and I'm going to produce a podcast for them. So cool. Right up my alley, stuff that I do for fun anyway, and then kind of helping them with more of a strategic approach to people finding community like digitally. And that's something that I do kind of for fun too. So I share that because I didn't realize how burdensome it was until being on the other side of it and not really having that pressure anymore. Like the leadership of our church, they know where Priscilla and I stand, and they keep us around and they like the dialogue. So it wasn't necessarily feeling bad about that, but it was like maybe the trouble that they would cause, or like I really do have a pastoral heart. Like, you know, these old school elders that they just don't know any better. They've been living in the South. They're in their 70s. And then they stumble upon my podcast and I'm talking about being gay affirming. I mean, part of me is just like, well, yeah, they need to hear that. But then another part of me is just like, people can only take baby steps. I mean, it's like there's some people that are supposed to be super radical and jolt it big time and talk about being on a, you know, on a scale, being on 10 when people are still on a 1, just to rattle their cage and make them think a little bit. But then there's some people, I think, like me, who's supposed to temper it a little bit and try to get people that are at 0.1 just maybe to 0.3. And so I mean, you can't go up to a 70-year-old person that has been taught a certain way their whole life and say, oh yeah, by the way, I believe everybody goes to heaven. Gay people are totally good. Like you just blow up people's world. Again, I know some people's intention or some people's purpose, let's use that word purpose, it is to blow people's world up, but I don't think that's mine.
I want to hear a little bit more about like the music world that you were in, just because that's like a point of commonality that we all have as well.
Joe 747, right?
That's right.
Taking it back, baby.
That's right.
So yeah, we want to hear a little bit about kind of like your involvement in the Christian music scene. Now, what's interesting is in a lot of ways, we grew up with a lot of the same type of bands, although you are slightly older than us. And so you kind of grew up with like the very early bands that, you know, might have been around when we were like in diapers. But
yeah. I'm
not trying to date you too much, but
no, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, my brother and I were always looking for cool Christian music because we weren't allowed to listen to anything else. So Stryper was a really big deal to us, like life-changing. Like it was like, this is like a savior to us. And so my brother immediately started finding The Crucified and Vengeance Rising. And if y'all aren't familiar, these are like old school thrash, death metal, and all that stuff. I didn't really take to that a whole lot.
We're actually interviewing Mark Solomon next week. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when Jared discovered The Crucified, it was like, oh my Lord, have mercy. You know, the Lord is good. And, but he also started to find, like, I was listening to a lot of contemporary Christian rock. Like I just was kind of like, you know, I'll listen to Stryper, I'll listen to some of this heavy stuff, but I also liked Petra and even some stuff that's embarrassing to admit. I'd admit it, I just can't think of their names right now. But my brother started finding the underground scene pre-Tooth and Nail. So Tooth and Nail kind of made the underground scene not so underground, but there's an underground Christian scene, bands like Adam Again, The Choir, Breakfast with Amy, like all these killer bands that it was kind of like a smaller culture that just never exploded like Tooth and Nail. So when Tooth and Nail happened, it was just the weirdest thing, guys, because going back to the age thing. So I was in college. I don't know how Tooth and Nail became such a freaking movement, such a big deal when the internet had no involvement in it.
No existence.
I was about to ask, like, how even before Tooth and Nail, like, how did you discover bands? Like, how were you a part of that scene pre-internet? Like, how were you connected to people all across the nation that were all listening to these underground bands when there wasn't this
Probably
entity?
magazines like HM, maybe, right?
Yeah. So White Throne was a magazine.
Yeah.
And the family Christian bookstores, if you found the right one, they would get those obscure stuff in there. And so,
cool.
But man, I was an indie rocker to the point where I would use my breaks as a school teacher to literally, and this was when it was not convenient to do so, but to literally, this is post when I was only listening to Christian stuff. But gosh, I wish I could remember the company, but I would literally listen to all the new indie albums that came out that this company is advertising, and pretty much listen to like 100 snapshots of albums to determine what I'm going to buy. Like I searched for it. So that was kind of the mentality that we were in, is we were hungry for really, really good music. So we searched for it. But what's so crazy about Tooth and Nail is everybody who listened to Tooth and Nail, we could feel that we were a part of something cool.
Mm-hmm.
How? Like, it's just so weird. Now, obviously, going to concerts and recognize, we went to Cornerstone 91, but that was pre Tooth and Nail also. But it's weird. But yeah, by the time you guys probably started getting into Tooth and Nail, I went from buying every single album that Tooth and Nail released to not listening to a whole lot. It was like the late 90s when I started listening to secular music. It just opened the door wide open for a way larger assortment. And the music that I was after at that time, Tooth and Nail kind of wasn't scratching that itch as much. Now, there were bands on Tooth and Nail that I would always buy if they came out with an album, a lot of the punk stuff and everything. But I kind of converted to Deep Elm Records and Crank Records and all this emo shit, man. That's the best time era of music. All you new school kids talking about Finch is emo. Get the hell out of here with that. It's Appleseed Cast and Mineral, man. Old school Jimmy Eat World. Get the hell out of here with Finch.
Today, for my class, I played. I'm also a teacher. I played Goodbye Sky Harbor.
Yeah, and
my students were at first they were like kind of pissed off. They're like, "What the hell is this, Mr. Mac?" And then it was, this is actually kind of catchy. It's got a cool groove to it,
right?
And then it's like that 16 minutes of that same beat, kind of like with a totally different styling in there. And they immediately were like, I love this. Where can I get this? I was like, this album changes your life if you get it.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So Joey, you're telling us then that you really never got into like the heyday of Tooth and Nail, like the mid 2000s, those early 2000s.
Right. Yeah. So I obviously, and Matt and Toby, and I would say justifiably so, thought that I was partial and prejudiced to Emery just because they were my friends. But I don't agree with those sentiments. Like I really respected and love the music that they wrote. But that was maybe I was really the only, I was not, and no, oh my gosh, they're geniuses, I'm sure, but I couldn't tell you an Underoath song. You know what I'm saying? Like,
what?
Yeah, just
Joey.
I missed it. I listened more to Underoath's first released, I think, on Take Hold record or Face Down, one of those labels. I listened to that more than any other Underoath album. I don't know. There was something about, I was a music snob. My wife still thinks that I am, but in that season of life, I was so snobby with, they're ripping this band off and they got that from the Get Up Kids, they're posers and all that. I think that there was something a little bit off-putting about just, there seemed to be a very generic way of screaming and singing. And I think some bands, one of them being Emery, they were able to do that where it just didn't sound so generic. But it was just like, I guess I just got burnt out of that sort of thing. And I'm sure Underoath did it better than anybody, but it's just like, I'm just not really interested. I'd say the last band of that genre that I really listened to a lot was Beloved, I don't know if you would put Stretch Armstrong in that category. Zayo to me is timeless. Like I can pick up a Zayo CD, and that's how old school I am. I'll pick up a CD, put it in my CD player.
Have you listened to the most recent Zayo album?
Probably not. How recent?
Just came out
Like
this year.
Okay.
It is quite honestly probably going to be my number one album of the year.
Wow.
It is so good.
Wow.
You got to check it out, man.
Yeah, I will.
It's good. It's good.
I will.
Yeah, we interviewed them on this podcast, and we actually saw them at Furnace Fest, and yeah they're so good.
Yeah, Joey, I was kind of surprised to hear that you weren't at Furnace Fest, and I know that there was maybe some other reasons within that, but the bands that I know are some of your biggest and most influential and favorite bands. I mean, they were there, and they were there maybe for the last time. A lot of them for the first time in 20 years. I feel like it would have been like a mecca and a super emotional moment for you to go back.
Yeah.
It was like the convergence of both generations of Tooth and Nail and Solid State bands. It felt like.
Yeah. I think this is where my age, and I know not everybody that is in their mid 40s are this boring, but I honestly, like, if I was there and I'm standing there watching Appleseed Cast,
arguably the best show at Furnace Fest, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
was it really?
Sounded great, looked great.
Yeah. So if I was standing there, I would have no regrets. I'd be like, I'm so happy I'm here. This is awesome. This is life changing. I wasn't there. I don't care. So it's like I'm happy either way. Like, y'all just said it was an amazing. I believe that it was. I'm sure I would have enjoyed it. I don't have any regrets. There are certain bands that if they come to Charleston, it's a no-brainer. But most bands, if they're coming to Columbia or Charlotte, I won't even think about it.
Wow.
I think I would drive distance to see Radiohead. I think I would drive distance to see Dinosaur Jr., two bands that I've never seen live. I may take the family to Charlotte, but that's just because it's a friend, John Mark McMillan. He's playing in Charlotte, and the kids like some of his music. But yeah, I guess I'm just getting old, man. Just getting old.
Is that the kind of music you're still listening to today? Are you, do you listen to music today? Or are you just all about the podcast world?
Totally a music freak.
Cool.
Totally still. Yep.
That's cool to hear.
Big into hip hop. I've finally, after a really, I'd say a solid 7 years, when I was probably listening to hip hop 65% of the time, I'm probably back to more 50-50, maybe 40% hip hop. But yeah, I mean, like there's a band called Porches. They just released an album, and I just can't get enough of it. I like the latest Vampire Weekend, just poppy as hell, and I just love every second of it. You know, I actually went through. I'll educate y'all a little bit, like around, and maybe you already know, but around the time of Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh and that garage scene, there's a band called Guided by Voices.
Yes,
this
love
dude
Guided by
literally
Voices.
has 100 albums on iTunes, and I love that music so much. I went through every single album and made a badass playlist. So yeah, I'm still big into music, and I would say if I had to say maybe bring it down to 3 genres, it would be hip hop. It'd be really nasty, grimy, like Dinosaur Jr., noisy sort of stuff, and then probably just real poppy indie stuff. Like just
interesting.
Good
Okay, like Phoenix. I really am kind of reintroducing myself to Phoenix. They were so big when I was in high school, and now I'm like realizing how genius they were in their pop sensibilities in that scene.
Right. So I'm surrendering all my credibility of an indie music fan. My favorite album probably of all time, I still haven't had the balls to put it ahead of Dave Bazan's. My brain is not working tonight. What is the 4th full length? It was After Control. Oh God.
Mason would probably know better.
2004.
That was like one of the last ones, right? I like. It's like a cartoony type of album cover, right? Yeah, I forget what that.
This is scary, guys. Am I seeing the early signs of dementia?
Uh-oh.
Anyway, Achilles heel.
Yes,
heel.
there you go.
Yeah.
It's like a lion or something, right?
Right. So that may still be my number one album, but dude, Some Nights by Fun is freaking fun. Like, I love that album. Like, I absolutely love that album. And for me, once I crossed the line of, I don't care if people think I'm a poser for listening to Taylor Swift or any of those sorts of things. I'm like, when you really think about fun and where that guy came from and the band that he was in called The Format, I mean, he came from the same places. He just wrote a genius pop album.
Yeah.
And then it just exploded.
We don't get to talk much about kind of like this indie pop stuff on this podcast. And I know Mason and I have a very big soft spot in our hearts for that same music. I think there's one album from that era in particular that I would put up there with a perfect album where there's every single song is an absolute banger and everything on it is just perfect.
Yeah.
And I would say Two Door Cinema Club Tourist History. You ever listen to that?
I have never.
Oh my God, dude.
Good
you
stuff.
have to get on. If you like fun and things like that, you have to get on that one.
Tell me that again so I can write it down.
Two Door Cinema Club is the band name. And the album is Tourist History.
They're from Dublin.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's like they were huge in that world. If you're like into that like mid 2010s or like 2010s, early 2010s, late 2000s indie pop, they're like classic. Like I would put them in the same sort of breath as like Phoenix, M83, Group Love.
Yeah. I do like Group Love.
Yeah. You're gonna dig these guys so much.
Yeah, I'll check them out.
But they're like they're a little bit more like, guitar driven. At least that album is, that first album.
Right. Yeah.
So good. Yeah, I've been listening to that M83 album so much lately. Oh my God.
Oh, is there a new one?
No. The one with like
2010.
Midnight City or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Oh my God. That like intro song too. Holy cow.
Yep.
Yeah, just to trance out to. We've been kind of talking about some of our favorite albums. Joey, we've hit the part of the episode here where we're going to ask you your top 5 most influential albums.
Top 5
of all time.
most influential albums, dude. All right. Well, let me try to go in chronological order. So the first would have to be "To Hell with the Devil" by Stryper. People may not know this, but Stryper was full-fledged, bold Christian lyrics.
Unabashed.
Sold 1 million albums. So, but they're on MTV. They're on the radio. I mean, it's freaking insane how big they got. But for me, it was very personal. It was like, thank you, Jesus, for good music that I can enjoy as a little 4th and 5th grade kid. So that was a big one.
I think just for like a little, shameless self-promotion, you can go back and listen to not 1, but 2 episodes with Michael Sweet on our podcast.
Sweet.
And check out Stryper.
Yeah. I've talked to him too. Yeah. It's on y'all's podcast too.
Yeah. In fact, the first one, he admits that he voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020, I believe too.
Yep. And 2020.
Dang. Yeah. I guess that doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me at all either.
Mean way. But yeah, it's interesting I've tracked down some people that I used to listen to in the Christian hair metal band days. And it's like, these dudes are like fundamentalists, man.
Yeah.
Like big time.
Totally. I suppose it kind of had to be if you were going to live in that scene and like stick to your guns on everything.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Second most influential album.
So I guess I would say in no particular order, I would say Poconacha by MXPX, just because, again, I was in that season where I wasn't allowed to listen to anything but Christian music. And when I heard Poconacha, it was my introduction to pop punk. I wasn't like the real deal punk rocker where I liked the, just the raw, screamy stuff, Bad Brains and, all that sort of stuff. But man, this singy, songy punk rock, Poconacha, it was like the greatest gift ever.
You say that you weren't a great punk rocker, but man, you were literally telling us, I don't know if it was on the podcast right away or if it was before our conversation, you were talking about how you had lime green Doc Martens. So I feel like you had to have been a pretty legit punk rocker.
Maybe so. I'll take that. So it's so funny how my list really does hinge on Christian and non-Christian stuff, because I missed out on a lot of really good hip hop And I did discover some cool Christian stuff, but the first album that I really allowed myself to enjoy was Outcast Speaker Box.
Oh.
And I think from that point on, it was just all out hip hop, man. I mean, that album, I was like, oh my gosh, this is good. And to this day, I kind of think Big Boy may be the best lyricist. He was actually coming to Charleston and canceled. I was going to go to that one, but yeah, Speaker Box.
I'm a massive fan of Andre 3000, and I'm curious if he's ever going to come out with anything else, or if Outkast's ever going to get back together and do some. I know I read this interview a couple years ago, probably 2 years ago now, and he was talking about how he doesn't feel like he can write a single verse. Like he's like tried to sit down, and he's like, I can't do it. Like nothing comes out, nothing. Period.
Wow.
I have zero. That just like hurts me.
Yeah.
It hurts.
For sure.
That guy had such an interesting flow that no one else had, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then Big Boy was just a total badass.
Yep.
Could you imagine the late 90s in Atlanta? Like how poppin' things would have been? You had 96 Olympics, you have Outkast starting to come out, and then eventually you have Norma Jean. Like you just got like all of this like cool shit happening. Atlanta Falcons and Michael Vick in those like, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. Like Atlanta was popping at a moment.
It was hot Atlanta.
It was.
For sure. For sure. I would say Static Prevails by Jimmy Eat World. So Clarity is one of my favorite albums of all time, but Static Prevails, I would literally give that album, and then Marigold is a song by Appleseed Cast. Those two things, Static Prevails, the album, and then Marigold, the song, tipped me over the edge with emo. That genre, those late 90s. I mean, golly, like literally my whole life, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, I've got classic emo stuff that's a theme song to it all. I mean, I can pull up a Jejune album or a, you know, old school Sunny Day Real Estate album, and it just takes me right back to that time. It's crazy.
Now, Joey, I don't think that you'd be surprised to hear this, but I think Mason and I have been. I should go back and tally how many people have said Jimmy Eat World in their top 5 most influential.
Really?
It's over half the list by far.
Yeah, it feels like every other artist.
Yeah.
And it does, and we've interviewed from like indie bands to super heavy metal bands, and almost every single one of them mentions Jimmy Eat World.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of them are like in their 40, like the artists themselves are like in their 40s, and so it kind of makes sense. Like Jimmy Eat World 25 years ago was kind of at like this moment in time where people coming of age that was just going to capture an entire generation of like alternative and indie and underground music.
But then like 3 weeks ago, we had on a guy who's 25, and he said that Jimmy World is his favorite. So
yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy. What a crazy band. Like, I mean, honestly, they're not anything super special in that genre other than that they were just really, really good.
Yeah.
And consistent.
Yeah. Well, we may have to argue about them being special, but
I love them. But I mean, like in terms of like the sound of everyone else, I mean, they kind of fall right in line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was my first it was the perfect album to get me into emo because my ears tend towards the poppy side, and it was the music, the thick, heavy guitars, but it was like good singing also. And then when they had like the harmonies and the different, whatever you call things that they're just intertwined. So I was like, gosh, this is so good.
Yeah.
I think I'm on album number 5.
Last one.
So
last one.
Probably a band y'all have never heard of called Ida. SIDA. Their album 10 Small Paces. So me and a friend of mine back in 2000, we followed Pedro the Lion for probably about 4 different cities, and they had a band called Ida, and it was my first introduction to like a really mild, mellow indie band. Like even Hard to Find a Friend, that may be what got me to that point where I was like, oh, super mellow, chill stuff is super moving, but it still had some of the up-tempo stuff, where Ida is just chill, folky stuff.
Is Ida even more chilled than like that first American football album?
Probably so. Probably so. Yeah. Lots of women singers. There's a male vocalist also. But just super cool band.
That is probably the most emo list we've ever gotten.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, it was crazy. If you would have hit me up with my favorite albums, it's interesting. I'd say hip hop's still got to be my favorite genre, but if you hit me up with my top 5 favorite albums, it probably would have been Fun, Achilles Heel, Sunday Real Estate, How It Feels to Be On, Clarity by Jimmy Eat World. I know I'm missing something. Probably, if any rap album's going to hit my top 10 or top 5, The Roots, How I Got Over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a really good album.
For sure.
Questlove one time retweeted me.
Did you really?
This is true.
What'd you tweet? Afros are awesome.
It's kind of niche, but like it was during the 2020 election when there was still like a million Democrats in the race, and one of the primaries must have happened, and Pete Buttigieg dropped out, and it was like early on in the primary, and I tweeted something like, first Sufjan, now Pete Buttigieg. What is it about Episcopalians and stopping after 2 states or something like that, or quitting after 2 states?
Yeah.
Something
awesome.
like that. And
it's still like probably the most niche tweet of all time as well. And that thing blew up.
Yeah. The fact that I said Episcopalians too, like people still knew it though.
That's awesome. Yeah. I don't have anything to rival that. I know Coolio liked a tweet. And I felt like, you know what?
That's pretty good street cred.
I could be a happy man for the rest of my life having Coolio like a tweet.
Yeah. That's awesome. Joey, what would you like to plug here at the end of the episode?
Yeah. So Pastor with No Answers podcast I love. And over the last year, you can probably search now for 5 episodes called My Depressive Mental Health Crisis, something like that. It just means a lot for me to put that stuff out there because I know how much solidarity means for people who struggle with mental health. But I enjoy Pastor with No Answers. I like it. I enjoy doing it. And I think it's a pretty decent podcast. So I've been behind the scenes building a community for people from all different walks of faith. I even have some atheists that have a Christian background that have found community. And if people want to go to, it literally is just taking emails. There you can go to bearw, that's BEARW.me, and then you can sign up, and I'll eventually start getting word out. Yeah, so it's kind of an underground community that's going to become a lot less underground over time. Some cool online events.
Wow, you're going to the mainstream. Sellouts.
Yeah, going mainstream, baby. Hell yeah.
Love it.
Playing fun for everybody.
A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking piece of shit. A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking dipshit. A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking piece of chode. Now, a lot of pastors get fired, but Driscoll got fired for being a fucking turd nugget. A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking piece of shit bitch. A lot of pastors get fired, but Driscoll got fired for being a fucking turd ducking. A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking dumbass. A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being a fucking dumb bitch.
Okay, that's a take. Like he really said that on the pulpit. Oh shit! At church, he was yelling at people. Well, I'll be damned. Pastor Mark Driscoll, boy, I like that guy.